The W at this junction in time would be better without Caitlin Clark because she is a bigger distraction than she is an additive. Caitlin Clark has gotten the WNBA over the necessary threshold they needed. Now people are watching. Now we realize, oh, there's talent in the W. Talent that's actually even greater than Caitlin Clark. And I'm not just talking about bigs like Asia. I'm talking about the Olivia Miles. I'm talking about the Paige Beckers. Hell, I'm talking about the Kelsey Mitchells. Caitlin got the necessary eyes there. But now that the eyes are there, we don't necessarily need her anymore. Caitlin did what only Caitlin could do, and we don't necessarily need her to do anymore. Thank you, Caitlin. We can take it from here. Now you're saying that the WNBA needs to be cognizant of where they put Caitlin Clark on posters. The WNBA and the officials need to alter the rules for Caitlin Clark. The WNBA and opposing players need to treat Caitlin Clark more gently. Caitlin Clark's coach needs to be cognizant of how she talks to her in public because it's going to look like there's an issue. Unless we can take off our gloves for Caitlin Clark and stop trying to act like she's a messiah, the WNBA could and would be better off without Caitlin Clark, at least without this version of everybody coddling and caressing and catering to Caitlin Clark.
The quote making the rounds has sparked a massive debate across the basketball world. Emmanuel Acho argued that the WNBA would actually be better off without Caitlin Clark, claiming she has become a bigger distraction than an addition to the league. Supporters of his view point to the constant media attention, heated rivalries, and non-stop controversy surrounding Clark. But critics argue that this ignores the undeniable impact she has had on the sport. Since entering the WNBA, Clark has driven record-breaking TV ratings, sold-out arenas, increased merchandise sales, and attracted millions of new fans. Whether people love her or criticize her, one thing is impossible to deny. Caitlin Clark has become the biggest conversation in women's basketball, and her influence continues to reshape the league in ways few players ever have.
I would say beginning of my off season last year after we got done in Vegas. Me and Ty connected on a really deeper level, and I said I never had this before, so it was kind of new for me. I'm grateful for Nike because I was with Nike for 8 years, and that was what it was. But Ty took special time out his day, not his. When I was in my off season to really figure out what I wanted to do and how I felt about potentially being a part of it, and the more and more we talked, it just made sense.
Did the Tyrese part of it make it any more special that he's around all the time, wears shoes all the time now? The video we saw yesterday.
For sure. I think that's the best part. He's very personable. He's human. He's an unbelievable basketball player, and I just think he's a solid human, man. I think everything that I'm trying to do in my life, I just want to be around good people, and I think he's one of the good ones.
We need to talk about what Kelsey Mitchell just said, because the Indiana Fever fan base has heard it, processed it, and is not happy about it. Not remotely. And when you actually sit with the full weight of what her comments imply about the direction of this team, about the internal dynamics surrounding Caitlin Clark's role, and about what certain players apparently envision for this roster going forward, the concern is entirely justified. Kelsey Mitchell made public comments about building chemistry with Ty Harris, about wanting to see more from Ty Harris, about implementing Ty Harris more and more into the offensive structure of this team going forward.
Part is for this week for you guys?
I just think discipline in the areas where we obviously lack. I think that team chemistry, I think you can always get that right. Implementation of other pieces like Ty. Just figure out what Ty kind of needs, as she, stays a part of our process. And
Let that sit for a moment. Ty Harris, not Caitlin Clark, not the player who has transformed the commercial and competitive identity of this franchise, not the point guard who is the primary reason this team fills arenas and generates the kind of national attention Indiana basketball has never previously received.
I think that team chemistry, I think you can always get that right. Implementation of other pieces like Ty. Just figure out what Ty kind of needs, as she, stays a part of our process. And all of us getting our feet wet as far as chemistry. I don't think you can never be too good for that every day. And I think that just kind of abiding by our culture, keeping our culture intact, and making sure that we align to just get work in. If you ain't coming here to get work in, then we're not doing the right things.
How do you feel like Ty got in there that first game, starting with you guys the other night?
I think it was pretty amazing. I texted her yesterday. I was like, "You're great," and I told her that it was coming from a place of like, you know, her having some lapses mentally about how she felt and what her role was. And I just want her to re-solidify and that she deserves to, you know, everything that happened the other night was for her, and she put us in a position to be good. And I think that'll be good. I think she'll have plenty more good reps in the future.
The player Kelsey Mitchell is publicly enthusiastic about developing chemistry with and seeing more of is Ty Harris, a backup guard whose role on this roster should be, at most, providing limited relief minutes behind one of the most talented playmakers in professional basketball. The reaction from observers paying honest attention to this situation has been swift and pointed, and it should be. Because what Mitchell's comments reveal, or at minimum strongly suggest, is a vision for this team's offensive identity that does not center Caitlin Clark. A vision that appears, based on the enthusiasm and specificity of the language used, to be considerably more comfortable with a Ty Harris-led backcourt than with the dynamic Clark-centered system that this team's entire value proposition is built upon.
I'm out this week, but how much of a mental reset can it be to have almost 10 days between games?
Man, I needed it. I ain't gonna lie, I needed it. I'm getting older, so I take that time very serious, just to reset, figure out what I need, figure out what my body needs, and ultimately figure out what makes me feel good to be my best self for myself, for the organization, and for the team. You know, I just think that mentally you gotta be your best version in order to get good results.
This is not a minor internal preference being aired casually. This is a foundational organizational question being answered in public by the wrong person, in the wrong direction, at the worst possible time. Let us be precise about the competitive context surrounding Ty Harris to understand why the enthusiasm Mitchell expressed is so difficult to justify on the merits alone. The improved performance that has generated some positive energy around Harris recently came against the Los Angeles Sparks. The Sparks came into that game with Kelsey Plum unavailable due to injury and Cameron Brink also sidelined. The roster Indiana faced was depleted. It was a collection of replacement-level players filling gaps created by significant absences. Performing well against that level of competition is not evidence of a player ready to absorb expanded responsibilities in meaningful game situations. It is a data point that needs to be placed in its proper context before it drives any kind of roster philosophy conversation. And yet, based on Mitchell's public comments, it appears that performance against a shorthanded Sparks team has generated enough excitement to fuel public statements about wanting more from Harris and building chemistry with her going forward. That is a significant overreaction to a limited sample size against diminished opposition, and it is being expressed in a way that draws an uncomfortable implicit contrast with the team's established starting point guard. Caitlin Clark is the point guard of the Indiana Fever. That is not a debatable premise. It is the organizational reality around which everything else on this roster is supposed to be constructed. Clark's presence, her playmaking, her gravity as a scorer, her ability to create opportunities for teammates, her relentless competitiveness. These are the qualities that make Indiana worth watching and worth investing in as a franchise. Now layer onto this the ongoing uncertainty surrounding Clark's injury status and availability, because that dimension of this story makes Mitchell's comments land even more uncomfortably. Clark was not practicing with the full group, working instead through individual sessions, while her availability for upcoming games remained uncertain. That situation has generated its own legitimate frustration, particularly given the history of day-to-day injury management surrounding Clark that extended throughout last season and left fans repeatedly uncertain about when they would see her return to full participation. The question being asked loudly and with genuine urgency is why reporters are not pushing harder on the specifics of Clark's situation. There was a moment in a recent game where Clark appeared ready to check back in, only for a substitution decision to pull her back before she re-entered the floor. Whether that decision was driven purely by the physical concerns surrounding her back, or whether other factors, including competitive frustration with how her minutes were being managed, contributed to that sequence, has not been answered clearly in the public reporting surrounding the team. These are not fringe questions invented by external critics looking for controversy. They are the natural and legitimate questions that arise when a franchise player is being managed in ways that appear inconsistent, when her minutes are being curtailed in situations where she appears capable of contributing, and when a teammate is making public statements about building chemistry with a backup who plays the same position. The Indiana Fever strung the injury situation along on a day-to-day basis for extended stretches last season. The fan base watched it happen and accepted it because there was an expectation that lessons had been learned and processes had been improved. If the same pattern is beginning to emerge again this season, the patience that was extended previously is not going to be available in the same measure. The audience watching this team has invested emotionally and financially in the promise of what Clark represents, and managing her health and availability with anything less than complete transparency and organizational urgency is a breach of that investment. But the Mitchell comments are the more urgent problem in the immediate term because they reflect something about the internal culture of this team that cannot be managed through better communication from the medical staff or more detailed injury reports from the coaching staff. What they reflect is a player who appears to be operating with a vision for this team's offensive identity that either does not include Clark at its center or that is, at minimum, significantly more comfortable without her than the franchise's competitive and commercial interests can afford. The Kelsey Mitchell show, as it has been described in the context of Indiana's recent history, was the organizational reality before Clark arrived. It was a system built around Mitchell's isolation scoring, her one-on-one creation, her individual offensive decision-making. It produced a first-team All-WNBA season for Mitchell and genuine individual recognition. It did not produce consistent team success or the kind of organizational identity that builds a sustainable competitive foundation. Clark's arrival was supposed to represent the evolution beyond that model, the transition from a one-player isolation system to a genuinely dynamic, multidimensional offensive structure capable of competing at the highest level. That transition has been fraught with difficulty precisely because it requires Mitchell to inhabit a different role than the one she inhabited during her period of individual peak performance. And by every observable measure, that transition has not been fully completed or fully embraced. Mitchell publicly expressing enthusiasm about Ty Harris as a chemistry-building priority, rather than directing that same enthusiasm toward maximizing her partnership with Clark, is not a neutral comment about player development. It is a signal about priorities that every observer paying honest attention should take seriously. Ty Harris's role on this team should be clearly defined and limited. She is a backup guard on a roster where the starting point guard is one of the most talented players in the sport. She was placed in competition for backup minutes with Raven Johnson, who was drafted specifically to provide depth at that position. The role confusion that has apparently developed around Harris, the uncertainty about what she is supposed to be doing and when, is itself a symptom of the broader organizational disarray that has characterized Indiana's direction this season. When a player does not understand her role, that is a coaching and roster construction problem. When a franchise cornerstone's immediate teammate is publicly expressing enthusiasm about expanding the role of that confused backup at the same position, the problem extends beyond coaching and into the cultural dynamics of the locker room itself. The combination of Clark's uncertain injury status, Mitchell's public comments about Harris, the pattern of curtailed Clark minutes in recent games, and the broader absence of a settled and consistent offensive identity for this team produces a picture of an organization that does not fully understand what it has or what it needs to do to make it work. Clark needs to be getting maximum available minutes when healthy. The offensive system needs to be built unambiguously around her playmaking and scoring gravity. The roster around her needs to be constructed and managed in ways that maximize her impact rather than creating parallel structures that compete with her role. And the players alongside her need to be publicly and privately committed to making that model work, rather than publicly expressing enthusiasm for arrangements that sideline its central premise. This current Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell combination and this current coaching staff arrangement cannot continue indefinitely producing the same tensions, the same inconsistencies, and the same organizational confusion without something fundamental changing. The version of Indiana that gives Clark what she actually needs to perform at her ceiling does not look like what is being described in Mitchell's public comments. It does not look like Ty Harris getting expanding chemistry sessions and accumulating minutes at the position Clark plays. It does not look like day-to-day injury marathons that leave the fan base perpetually uncertain. It looks like a franchise that has made an unambiguous decision about its identity and its future, and that has organized every personnel and strategic decision around making that identity succeed. That decision has not been made clearly. The evidence is visible in the comments, the rotations, the injury management, and the internal dynamics that keep surfacing in public statements from the players involved. Indiana needs to make that decision. It needs to make it soon, and it needs to make it in the right direction. Because the alternative is another season of watching an extraordinary talent operate in an environment that does not deserve her, while the window for building something genuinely meaningful around what she represents continues to close.